Well, what do you think about the Just Stop Oil protests? Are they raising the status of the climate emergency in a really important, effective way, or are you, frankly, really fed up with them? Protesters have made a habit of showering the world's sporting stages in fluorescent orange, and yesterday they made their mark at Wimbledon twice, throwing confetti jigsaws onto Court 18 and leaving the players like Katie Boulter picking up the pieces.
But how effective are disruptive protests like these? A man who was once at the forefront of almost every climate demonstration in Britain wants a more united approach. Swampy will be telling us why in just a moment. First, though, here's Jay Akbar with a look back at his activism.
Loved by his supporters, a thorn in the side of developers. Daniel Hooper, best known as Swampy because of his unique look, became a household name in the 90s when he dug a tunnel underneath the Newbury Bypass roadworks and lived in it.
Now, my mother, the magistrate, she sat for 35 years on the bench in Newbury. She had to cope with the likes of Swampy.
Then, in 1997, the human mole burrowed 40 feet underground to protest a dual carriageway in Devon, staying there for a week. But Swampy was met with a backlash when he tried to stop Manchester Airport's second runway and then disappeared from public life. 2 decades later, in 2020, he was back in the headlines, occupying a treehouse in Buckinghamshire to block the HS2 project and returned to tunnelling. But after nearly 30 years, and with the rise of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, how well have these climate stunts stood the test of time?
Well, Swampy, who his actual name is Daniel Hooper, joins us now, alongside someone who used to be with Extinction Rebellion, Rupert Reed. So welcome to you both. Swampy, when you saw the protests yesterday, what did you think? Brilliant, go on you, this is really important publicity, or not the right way to proceed?
I thought that it was incredibly brave people who care about the environment.
Right. Continuing your noble tradition of being ultra-disruptive so that they get talked about?
I don't think, there's different types of direct action, isn't there? And the type of direct action that I would do would be to hold companies accountable that are causing environmental damage.
Do you think that by throwing a jigsaw on Court 18 and getting a Wimbledon player to clear it up is holding companies accountable?
That particular action isn't holding companies accountable, but it's got people talking about it. I'm not saying that, I wouldn't do it that way. That's what I'm saying.
You're not saying you wouldn't do it that way, or you are saying you wouldn't do it that way?
Well, at the moment, I wouldn't do it that way, but I think the people that are really dedicated people.
The thing that struck me, because when I was in local radio, I covered the sort of disruption that you caused, and what I would say is that you actually had a direct effect on people trying to build things which you thought were environmentally damaging. The sort of obstruction that you caused did, actually physically stop people doing things. Whereas I'm not sure that if you're a climate campaigner, doing a Just Stop Oil protest at Wimbledon does have any direct effect on oil and gas drilling, for instance.
Well, we just had the hottest July in history, haven't we?
I don't think any of us are in dispute about the problem.
Yeah, the problem is there.
Totally agree.
And
totally
we're talking about it today.
Yes, and we would be talking about it on the basis that we've just had the record hot day.
Yes.
So where is the accountability in the Just Stop Oil protests?
This is where we need to also have a talk about how we're going to tackle the problem, bringing the majority of people together.
Right.
Who, the majority of people want to stop climate change.
There we go. So, Rupert Reed, you used to be with Extinction Rebellion. Why did you leave?
Well, it became clear to me and a number of other people in XR that Extinction Rebellion had achieved something splendid, raising climate consciousness, but that if we were going to actually win, we actually needed to bring the majority with us, the silent majority, the moderate majority. And that's what the Climate Majority Project is all about. That's why Swampy is joined with us and Lord Deben and Lord Randall from the Conservatives and a whole host of diverse people to say, isn't it time that rather than bickering with each other, we got together and faced the common enemy, which is, as has just been mentioned, is a huge and dire threat to all of us and to all of our children. So what we're seeking to do in the Climate Majority Project is mobilise this coalition of unusual suspects and say, let's actually set aside our differences and start to work on the root cause of the problem in the chronic absence of sufficient government leadership. So we're asking people to get busy getting resilient in their local communities, growing food together where they live. People in professions like the law, like insurance, to act together to get their companies...
Oh, we've got a musical soundtrack.
So sorry.
Somebody's
I don't
trying to
know
come
what
in on the-
It's Kate Garraway's protest.
Oh, my God, it's going again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
That person obviously wants to get in on the conversation.
Yeah.
I think
That's
they do.
great.
They're very keen.
Yeah,
Well, silent as well.
It's about people coming together and working where they've got power, along with other people. We all know it's not enough just to recycle and to be green consumers.
So, Rupert, when you look back,
Yeah.
we've reported on a number of Extinction Rebellion protests that were made, and you were a spokesperson for them. The gluing, your supporters gluing themselves to trains, to the underground, one of the most environmentally friendly forms of transport in Canning Town, and then the issues that come from there. Do you think you got that wrong? Do you think there were many of those protests that weren't actually effective in forwarding the discussion and actually just created a lot of anger and frustration?
I think that sometimes protesters have got it wrong. And you mentioned Canning Town. That was a striking instance. I think that's where some of us started to think there needs to be a much broader coalition that brings people together to do the positive stuff that needs doing. And that's what's actually going to be effective. That's what's going to, in the long run, we think, change people's minds. When enough people in the law, in insurance, in teaching, in their churches, where they live, get together and start to create the change on the ground that is not being done right now by our government.
Have you been able to speak to the organisers of Just Stop Oil? Because having come from Extinction Rebellion and having a sort of a history of this, and to discuss what you've learnt from the protests that you were a part of and understanding where you want your new group to go and say, look, can we coordinate this together so actually you stop upsetting everybody and driving people in the opposite way from supporting your cause, and we bring them with us?
Can I come back on that?
Yeah, of course.
Because, I don't think people who care about climate change, which is, as we say, the majority of people are going to be put off doing anything about climate change because they don't agree with individual actions.
How do you measure that?
Well, would you? We're looking at the destruction of the planet.
But in your head, you're coming from a position of there's a climate emergency, we need to act. But in other people's heads, particularly those people who've waited hours to go and watch a match in Wimbledon, or people watching those protests, they might think, you know what, I just have stopped listening.
Well,
I'm not saying that's the right thing to do.
Do you think that will make them go out and get a 4x4 and drive more? I don't think so.
Well, it might not stop them doing that, seeing that...
It might make them less engaged with the whole debate.
I can't see it. I think you'd have to be pretty daft to say, let's,
Let's destroy our children's futures just because...
No, of course, I know, Rupert, but the thing is, how do you measure it? How do you measure the impact that your protests... that these protests and your tactics are having. For instance, one measurement might be, well, you look at what the government's doing. Has the government changed anything? One of the things it's changed is protest law.
You're
it's made it harder to protest.
Yeah. So
or, on the other hand, Sir Keir Starmer said he's going to stop new oil and gas drilling, but he's going to allow those licences which have already been approved to go ahead. So what my question is how do you measure how effective those tactics are?
It's a great question, and the answer will only really be available in 30 years' time. And how are people going to look back in 30 years' time on where we're at now? The crucial question that everyone has to answer is what are you going to say to your children when they ask you, when you knew, what did you do? So what we're saying to everyone is, please, if you're part of the moderate majority, go to climatemajority.com, get involved and start taking action on the ground so that you can answer your children when they ask you that.
We've just had a line from the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, who has said that the government strongly encourages sporting organisations to take out legal injunctions against protesters. He said that would mean more severe criminal penalties for people who broach them. I mean...
OK, so on the subject of protest law, I mean, protest has been a part of the changes, the most important changes that have happened, be it women getting the vote, stopping or making it not OK to be racist and homophobic. You know, so many things, you know, the minimum wage, you know, these are all, you know, helped along by protest. And the government's new laws...
to crack down. Well, it's one of the effects, isn't it, of these protests. Rupert, what did you make this week of Rishi Sunak saying that everybody should do a Johnny Bairstow if they're faced with a Just Stop Oil protester? Just heroically handle them off the pitch.
I think what everyone should do is what they can do to face up to the threat of our time, the thing which is going to define our time, the question which our children will have for us when they look back on their lives.
Do you think that protesters face being manhandled because of the insistence on these tactics?
But look, what we need to do, Susanna, is get beyond the debate about tactics to tackling the core of the problem. That's why we think what we've got in the Climate Majority Project is really positive, because it's all about what you can positively do.
You need to coordinate
along with other people.
Because, of course, it's those tactics that we saw yesterday, which is why we're talking about it again today, isn't it? It's their tactics that's creating
It is having an effect, isn't it?
Well, but you could also choose to focus less on the tactics and more on the root causes of the problem, right? Let's talk more about the hottest day in history.
Well, 2 days ago. I mean, Laura's been talking about it all morning.
And Laura's absolutely great. And what we need is for the whole of the media to start to swing to focus on this. Like in the Second World War, for example, we didn't spend all our time talking about the tactics of conscientious objectors, right? We spent most of our time talking about how are we going to deal with this common enemy. And the common enemy that we face now, the whole of humanity faces, is so awesome. That's what we need to have a laser-like focus
Rupert
on.
and Swampy, Daniel, thank you very much indeed. It's good to talk to you this morning. Well, let's turn our attention to Laura right now.